Hi, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, I'm Olivia. This true crime story is unusual because it's as much about the people as it is the place that links them together. A 50-mile desolate stretch of highway between Houston and Galveston, Texas, which has become known as the Highway to Hell. Since the 1970s, over 30 girls and women have gone missing or been found murdered along this highway. It's become one of the most infamous dumping grounds in the nation, and some say it's the bloodiest stretch of highway in America. It's believed the murders are the work of multiple serial killers because most of the victims are females between the ages of 12 and 25. Some even share physical characteristics. But despite efforts from the police and even the FBI, most of the cases remain unsolved. The first known victim is 14-year-old Brenda Jones. She was last seen on her way to visit her aunt on July 1st, 1971. Her body was found the next day. 13-year-old Colette Wilson was last seen on June 17, 1971. Her body was found 5 months later near the body of 19-year-old Gloria Gonzalez, who had last been seen in Houston on October 28, 1971. 14-year-old Rhonda Johnson and 13-year-old Sharon Shaw were last seen on August 4, 1971. In Galveston, their remains were discovered in a marsh on January 3, 1972. 15-year-old Deborah Ackerman and Maria Johnson were last seen accepting a ride near an island ice cream shop on November 15, 1971. Their bound and partially nude bodies were found 2 days later. 14-year-old Lynette Bibbs and 15-year-old Tamara Fisher were last seen on February 1, 1991 in Houston. Their bodies were found together 2 days later. 14-year-old Georgia Gear and 12-year-old Brooks Bracewell were last seen on September 6, 1974. Their bodies were found together 7 years later. There were often delays in finding the bodies or in identifying the girls, giving the killers a chance to get away, and some of the girls were categorized as runaways, meaning the initial investigation wasn't into a criminal case. Perhaps most detrimental is that police didn't share information across jurisdictions, so for a long time, the true number of missing and murdered women was not known. 13-year-old Crystal Jean Baker was last seen using a phone at a local convenience store on March 5, 1996. 2 hours later, her body was found. She was raped, strangled, and dumped over a bridge. The most recent body discovered was 17-year-old Jessica Caines in 2016. She had disappeared back in 1997, last seen driving her father's truck, which was later found abandoned along Interstate 45. If you think about how it took 19 years to find Jessica Caine, how many other women are out there that just haven't been found yet? Perhaps the most infamous area along the interstate is a 25-mile stretch of rural land bordering the Calder oil fields and League City. It's known as the Texas Killing Fields, and between 1984 and 1997, the nude bodies of 4 women have been found here. That's because the fields have been described as the perfect place for killing somebody and getting away with it. It's filled with oil rigs and dirt roads, an extremely remote area. If you screamed, no one could hear you. If you tried to run, you didn't have any place to go. A mile away from the interstate, you drive down a dirt road, dump the body, and then you're gone forever. The first body found in the fields was Heidi Fye, who was last seen in League City on October 10, 1983. A few months after her disappearance, her body was discovered in the fields. A year later, 16-year-old Laura Miller disappeared, just after she moved with her family to League City. She'd gone to a nearby store to use a payphone on September 10, 1984, and never returned. In 1986, Miller's body was found in the same field, not far from where Fye's had been found. During the search for Miller, police made a gruesome discovery, a third body, but there was no leads on her identification, so she became known as Jane Doe. And then in 1991, a fourth body was discovered. But again, no leads on her identification, so she became known as Janet Doe. And these women would remain unknown for over 20 years until advances in DNA technology allowed them to be identified. Jane Doe, found in 1986, was Audrey Cook. She was last seen in December 1985. Janet Doe, who was found in 1991, was identified as Donna Brudame. She hadn't been heard from since 1991, and her sister had been looking for her all those years, never knowing what happened. Although many of the cases do remain unsolved, there are some suspects for the murders along the highway to hell. Michael Lloyd Self, a sex offender from Galveston, became a suspect in the murders of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. After hours of interrogation, Self confessed to the murders and received life in prison for Shaw's murder. Self would die in custody. However, he retracted his confession, saying he was coerced into confessing by police through torture, which is supported by the fact that the police chief and his deputy were later arrested for crimes that included torture of detainees. It's now believed Self was wrongly convicted, due in part to the fact that in 1998, Edward Harold Bell confessed to killing 11 girls, calling them the 11 that went to heaven. These included Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, as well as Colette Wilson. He also identified another of his victims as Kimberly Pitchford, last seen in Houston on January 3, 1973. Her body was found in a ditch 2 days later. However, he was never charged with these murders, since no evidence, biological or otherwise, incriminated him. He remained a prime suspect until his death in April 2019. Another suspected serial killer is William Lewis Reese, who was serving a 60-year sentence for kidnapping when DNA matched him to a girl's murder in Oklahoma. He then confessed to killing Jessica Kane and to the murder of 20-year-old Kelly Cox, who was last seen on July 15, 1997. Reese led the investigators to where their bodies were buried. He is also suspected in the murder of 12-year-old Laura Smither, last seen going for a jog on April 3, 1997. 17 days later, her nude, decomposing body was found. Kevin Edison Smith was arrested in April of 2012, 16 years after Crystal Jean Baker's body was found. DNA technology had advanced enough in those years to connect him to the crime, and he was later convicted for her murder and sentenced to life in prison. A ray of light in all this darkness is the Crystal Jean Baker Act, which took effect on September 1, 2019. The law authorizes the collection of DNA samples from individuals charged with certain felonies and compares the samples through the CODIS database in an effort to clear unsolved cases. In 2013, Mark Roland Stallings, a convicted kidnapper serving a life term, confessed to killing a girl in 1991 and dumping her body in the fields. Later identified as Donna Prudhomme, though he hasn't been charged with any murders, he remains a suspect in the murders of Donna Prudhomme and Audrey Cook. John Robert King and Gerald Peter Schwartz claimed to have attacked and killed Shelley Sykes, who disappeared on May 24, 1986, and whose blood-spattered car was found abandoned on Interstate 45. Though they couldn't lead investigators to her body, they were convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. To this day, her body has never been found. Unfortunately, there are many similar cases of girls in this area who have just disappeared. Sandra Ramber, who was last seen in her home in Santa Fe, Texas, on October 26, 1983, she was determined to be missing due to the fact that the front door was left open, food was in the oven, and her purse and coat were still in the house. Suzanne Richardson was last seen working as a night clerk at the Casa del Mar condominiums on October 7, 1988. Witnesses reported hearing a female screaming, and a lone shoe was found in the parking lot. She has never been seen or heard from again. I've talked about some of the girls whose bodies have been recovered, But there are many others who just vanished. Their bodies have never been discovered, and their fates remain unknown.